Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The data slate in Admiral Forlag's hand felt heavier than its weight suggested. It contained the complete service record of the man designated as Instructor, a title that was itself a misnomer, a quiet joke among the fleet's upper echelons. The file was thin, almost insultingly so for a man of his supposed importance. Most of it was redacted, black bars obscuring commendations and reprimands with equal, indifferent authority. But one entry, under the field for previous rank, was starkly clear. It read simply, Farmer. Kel did not feel like an instructor, and he certainly no longer felt like a soldier. He felt like a warden on a forgotten moon, the sole proprietor of a dust farm that grew nothing but silence. LV 417 was its official designation, a barren sphere of ochre rock and rust-colored sand orbiting a dying red giant. The corporate hegemony, in its infinite and rapacious wisdom, had decided this rock would be their next great agricultural hub. All it required was a little persuasion, a gentle terraforming process powered by the colossal atmospheric processor that squatted in the center of the valley like a metal tick on a dead animal's hide. His job was simple. He monitored the processor. He calibrated the moisture vaporators. He walked the perimeter of the fenced-off compound, his mag rifle a familiar, reassuring weight on his shoulder. He did his rounds, filed his reports, and counted the rotations until his contract expired. 312 to go. Each one was a small victory against the crushing monotony, a single grain of sand falling through the hourglass of his sentence. He had chosen this assignment for its isolation, a self-imposed exile from a galaxy he no longer recognized or cared for. War had hollowed him out, leaving behind a husk animated by little more than protocol and a stubborn refusal to die. The processor was the heart of the operation, a towering structure of gray alloy and blinking indicator lights that hummed with a power that felt too deep, too resonant for a simple fusion core. He had never been inside the primary containment chamber. His security clearance, despite being the station's sole human occupant, was surprisingly low. All he knew was that it worked. The air outside the compound was slowly, almost imperceptibly, gaining a higher oxygen content. The dust storms seemed less frequent. The hegemony's technology was a relentless, brutal force of nature in its own right, and it was winning. He sat in the cramped observatory, sipping a cup of nutrient paste that tasted vaguely of recycled water and regret. The red giant, Proxima Ceti, filled the reinforced plasteel viewport, a baleful eye staring down at its dominion of rock and silence. In the distance, the processor spire stabbed at the bruised twilight sky. Its central column glowed with a soft, internal blue light that pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, like a sleeping heart. It was a sight he had seen every cycle for the past year, and it had never once offered him comfort. It was merely a fact of his existence, as immutable as the vacuum outside. That evening, the rhythm faltered. A klaxon, shrill and insistent, shattered the quiet of his quarters. Red emergency lighting bathed the Spartan room in a hellish glow. Kale was on his feet before the second chime, his body reacting with an ingrained muscle memory that his mind had long tried to forget. He grabbed his rifle from its rack by the door and sprinted down the sterile corridor toward the main control room. The slate on the wall pulsed with an alert. Power fluctuation, core chamber. The control room was a semicircle of consoles arranged around a holographic display of the processor. The blue light at its center was flickering erratically now, stuttering like a dying bulb. Below it, a series of amber warnings cascaded down the main screen. Core temperature was spiking. Energy output was unstable. He ran a diagnostic, his fingers flying across the touch-sensitive panels. The results made no sense. The fusion initiator was stable. The magnetic containment field was holding at 100%. All secondary and tertiary systems reported green. The problem was the source itself. Protocol dictated he seal the sector and await instructions from orbital command. It was the safe option, the one that would keep him alive and out of trouble until his contract was up. But something else compelled him. It was the light. The pulsing blue light had always felt wrong. It was too organic for a machine, too mournful. He felt a flicker of something he had not felt in years, a cold curiosity that pricked at the edges of his apathy. He overrode the sector lockdown. his command codes granting him access. The heavy blast door to the processor's maintenance levels hissed open, revealing a corridor that descended deep into the moon's crust. The air grew warmer, thick with the smell of ozone and superheated metal. The humming intensified, vibrating through the soles of his boots, a bass note that seemed to resonate directly in his bones. He passed levels of machinery he did not recognize, conduits thick as his torso snaking along the walls, glowing with the same blue energy. He was far beyond the limits of his clearance now. Every step was a violation of his contract, of hegemony law. He kept going. The final corridor opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. He stopped on the gantry, his breath catching in his throat. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a crackling lattice of pure energy, was the source. It was not a reactor. It was a creature. It was tall and slender, vaguely humanoid but impossibly graceful, its form composed of something that looked like living, solidified light. Its limbs were long, its head featureless save for a smooth, opalescent surface. The blue light emanated from within its chest, pulsing in time with the alarms that now seemed a galaxy away. It was held fast by shimmering golden beams that anchored it to emitters positioned around the chamber. Wires and thick cables, like metallic leeches, were physically attached to its body, siphoning the energy that pulsed from its core. It was a prisoner. The entire terraforming project, the grand ambition of the hegemony, was powered by the torment of a single, captive being. He had heard whispers on the outer colonies, stories of the Whisperers, a mythical species of energy beings wiped out during the initial expansion wars. They were dismissed as folklore, ghost stories told by superstitious miners. But here was one, alive and in agony. As he watched, the creature convulsed. The blue light in its chest flared violently, and the entire structure shuddered. The power fluctuation. It was not a malfunction. It was a seizure. He saw a small access panel near the base of the containment field, a manual coolant and nutrient valve. Protocol would be to purge the system, to let the creature burn out and wait for a replacement. He did not think. He simply acted. He slid down a service ladder, ignoring the warning runes that glowed red around the containment platform. He reached the panel, his gauntlet hands fumbling with the latch. He keyed in an override, a code he was not supposed to know, one he had gleaned from a drunken engineer years ago. The panel hissed open. Inside was a simple lever-marked, aqueous solution. It was little more than purified water, meant to cool the contact points. He pulled the lever. A thin stream of mist sprayed from a nozzle near the creature's bound feet. It was a pathetic offering, a cup of water for a being of pure energy. But as the mist touched its form, the creature stilled. Its violent convulsions ceased. The frantic pulsing in its chest slowed, returning to the steady, rhythmic beat he knew from the observatory. For a moment, there was silence. Then, it turned its smooth, featureless head toward him. He felt something brush against his mind, a feeling of cool water on a sunburn, a gentle, inquisitive touch that was not a thought but an emotion. Gratitude. Then the world exploded in light and sound. The alarm screamed in earnest. The containment field flared, and a voice, cold and metallic, boomed from the chamber's speakers. Unauthorized access to primary conduit. Security team dispatched. Subject Kale, stand down and surrender. He looked up from the control panel to the captured being. Its head was still turned toward him, and in that moment, he felt the psychic touch again, this time not gratitude, but a warning. A plea. He had just signed his own death warrant, but as he looked at the prisoner in its cage of light, he realized he had not felt this alive, this purposeful, since the day he had left the military. He had 311 rotations left. He decided he would not be spending them here. The blast doors at the far end of the chamber began to grind open, revealing the silhouettes of hegemony shock troopers, their armor gleaming under the harsh emergency lights. Commander Jorik stood among them, his face a mask of cold fury visible through his helmet's visor. Jorik. Of all the officers in the sector, it had to be him. Their history was written in the blood of a failed campaign on Cygnus X. 1. A scar Kale carried on his soul. Kale. Jorik's voice crackled over the comms, devoid of any warmth. You have committed a capital offense. Surrender the facility, and I might let you live long enough for a trial. Kale looked from Jorik's approaching squad to the captive. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an inevitability he had been running from for a decade. He raised his mag rifle, not at Jorik, but at the primary emitter control panel to his left. He fired a single, precise shot. The console exploded in a shower of sparks. One of the golden beams holding the creature flickered and died. The being, which he now thought of as female, a strange, baseless intuition, slumped to one side, its balance thrown off. It raised its head again, and this time the mental touch was a sharp, clear image, a series of conduits, a pressure release valve, a path, a way out. He had made his transgression. Now came the consequences. The chaos was immediate and absolute. Jorik's troopers opened fire, their pulse rounds searing the air around Kale, chewing chunks of metal from the gantry he stood on. He returned fire, not aiming to kill, but to disable, to create confusion. He was one man against a squad, an impossible fight. But he was not alone. The Whisperer, partially freed, flexed one of its long limbs. A wave of pure kinetic force, invisible and silent, erupted from its hand. It slammed into the advancing troopers, sending them flying backward like dolls. Their armor sparked and shorted out, their weapons clattering to the floor. Jorik, better shielded, was thrown back, but quickly regained his footing, his face contorted with rage. "Contain the asset," he roared. "Kill the traitor." Kale used the opening. He followed the path the Whisperer had shown him in his mind, sprinting along the gantry toward a heavy maintenance hatch. He fired at the magnetic lock, the bolts shearing with a scream of tortured metal. He wrenched the heavy door open, revealing a dark, dusty service tunnel. He turned back. The Whisperer was still anchored by 3 beams, struggling against them. It could not free itself. He had to go back. His survival instinct screamed at him to run, to save himself. But the image of the creature, held in its agonizing prison, had imprinted itself on his conscience. He vaulted back over the railing, landing hard on the main platform, the floor vibrating with the sheer power being unleashed in the room. He ran toward the remaining emitter controls, pulse rounds whizzing past his head. He destroyed the second console. Another beam vanished. The Whisperer was now held only by 2, its body twisting, its inner light flaring with an intensity that made the air crackle. It reached out, not with a wave of force, but with a single, slender finger of light. The energy tendril touched the third and final control panel. The panel did not explode. It simply dissolved into fine gray dust. The last beam died. For a heartbeat, the Whisperer hung in the air, free. Then it collapsed onto the platform, its light dimming to a faint, fragile glow. It was powerful, but its long imprisonment had left it weak, disoriented. Jorik saw his chance, raising his sidearm, a heavy-bore plasma pistol. Kale moved without thinking. He tackled the weakened creature, pushing it toward the open maintenance hatch as Jorik's shot went wide, melting a fist-sized hole in the wall where they had been moments before. He shoved the Whisperer into the tunnel's darkness. "Go," he yelled, the word feeling foreign in his throat. He turned to face Jorik, laying down a line of suppressing fire to cover their retreat. He backed into the tunnel, pulling the heavy hatch door closed as best he could. The last thing he saw was Jorik's face, incandescent with a personal hatred that went far beyond mere duty. Then the door slammed shut, plunging them into absolute darkness. They were free, but they were trapped deep beneath the surface of a hostile moon, hunted by a man who would not stop until they were both dead. The alliance was sealed not by words, but by a shared enemy and the desperate, primal need to survive. The Whisperer lay on the tunnel floor, its light barely a flicker. He knelt beside it, placing a hand on its strange, smooth skin. It was cool to the touch, like polished stone. A weak pulse of gratitude, tinged with pain, entered his mind. He had to get them out of the tunnels, away from the facility. Their flight through the service corridors was a desperate scramble through darkness and dust. The Whisperer, whom he had begun to call Lyra in the privacy of his own thoughts, was weak. She could walk, but her movements were unsteady, her inner light a wavering candle flame. He supported her, half-carrying her through the labyrinthine network of tunnels that honeycombed the rock beneath the processor. He had only a vague knowledge of these tunnels from old schematics, but Lyra seemed to know the way. She would gently guide him with a mental nudge, a faint image of a junction or a ladder, leading them deeper into the moon's forgotten anatomy. They had been moving for what felt like hours when they heard it, the distant, rhythmic thud of a hegemony gunship's engines. Jorik was not just searching the surface. He was using seismic sensors to track them underground. They were running out of time and places to hide. They emerged into a vast, natural cavern, a colossal geode whose walls were lined with dull, fist-sized crystals. A fissure in the ceiling high above let in a sliver of the red giant's weak light, illuminating a path that led up and out onto the surface. It was their only way out. As they began the treacherous climb, the thudding of the gunship grew louder, closer. It was directly overhead. A brilliant searchlight stabbed down through the fissure, pinning them against the crystalline wall. They were exposed. Nowhere left to run. Kale? Jorik's voice boomed, amplified and distorted by the gunship's external speakers. A heavy machine cannon on the ship's belly swiveled to bear on them. There was no cover, no escape. Kale pushed Lyra behind him, raising his rifle in a futile gesture of defiance. This was it. This was how it ended, on a barren rock, defending a creature he did not understand, for a cause he had not chosen. But as the cannon began to whine, charging for a killing shot, Lyra moved. She stepped out from behind him, placing her hand on his shoulder. Her light, which had been so faint, suddenly blazed. It was not the soft blue from before, but a brilliant, searing white. She raised her free hand toward the gunship hanging in the sky above. He felt the energy build, a static charge that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. It was not a violent or explosive feeling, but a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the very rock beneath his feet. A wave of force, far more powerful than the one in the core chamber, erupted from her hand. It was not a blast. It was a perfect, crushing null field. The gunship's engines died instantly. Its lights went out. The whine of the cannon cut off. The entire machine, a marvel of hegemony military engineering, simply went dead. It hung in the air for a second, a silent metal coffin, before gravity reasserted its claim. It plummeted from the sky, crashing into the far side of the canyon with a cataclysmic roar of tearing metal and detonating fuel cells. The echo of the crash faded, replaced by an unnerving silence. The immediate threat was gone. Kale turned to Lyra, a dozen questions on his lips, but they died when he saw her. The brilliant white light was gone, and her faint blue glow was now almost entirely extinguished. She swayed on her feet and then collapsed, her form becoming almost translucent. The effort had drained her completely. He scooped her up into his arms. She was surprisingly light, her body having an unsettling lack of substance. He had to get her to safety, somewhere they could rest, somewhere Jorik's patrols would not find them. He looked up at the fissure, at the sliver of bruised sky. The crash would draw every hegemony unit on the moon to this location. He had to move, and he had to move now. He began to climb, Lyra a fragile weight in his arms, the first act of mutual protection complete. One had saved the other from immediate death. Now the other had to ensure their continued survival. Their bond was no longer just an alliance of convenience. It was one of necessity, forged in fire and silence. The journey across the blasted surface of LV-417 was an ordeal. The red sun baked the ochre plains, and the thin, nitrogen-heavy atmosphere was a constant irritant. Kale's suit recycled his air, but it could do nothing about the oppressive heat and the fine, abrasive dust that found its way into every joint and seal. He carried Lyra for the first full cycle, pushing his body to its limits, his military training the only thing keeping him from collapsing. He found a shallow cave carved into the side of a mesa by millennia of wind, and there they took shelter. Lyra's light remained perilously dim. She was conscious but unresponsive, a silent, fragile passenger in his care. He did what little he could, cleaning the dust from her strange, smooth skin with a damp ration cloth. He sat with her in the quiet darkness of the cave, the silence broken only by the hiss of his suit's respirator and the mournful howl of the wind outside. It was in that shared silence that their communication truly began. It started as a flicker behind his eyes, a fleeting image of a green world, of towering trees with silver bark, of a sky with two suns. At first he dismissed it as a hallucination, a symptom of exhaustion. But the images grew stronger, more coherent. Lyra was awake, and she was showing him her memories. She was showing him her home. He saw her species, the Whisperers, moving through crystalline forests. They were not just inhabitants of their world. They were its gardeners, its consciousness. They lived in symbiosis with the planet, their energy nurturing its flora, and the planet, in turn, sustaining them. They communicated not with words, but with shared thoughts, with resonant frequencies that were a form of song. It was a world of perfect, silent harmony. Then he saw the ships. Hegemony survey vessels, stark and gray against the vibrant green. He saw the first contact, the misunderstanding, the fear. The hegemony saw the Whisperer's power not as a part of nature, but as an untapped resource, a weapon to be controlled. And he saw the man who led the subjugation, a younger Admiral Forlag, his face cold and determined as he gave the order to harvest the planet. The vision was brutal and unflinching. He saw the Whisperers rounded up, captured, their connection to their world severed. He saw the planet itself begin to wither and die without its caretakers. He saw Lyra, one of the last, being taken, imprisoned in the cold, mechanical shell of the processor, her life-giving energy twisted into a tool to create a pale imitation of the world the hegemony had destroyed. The hidden truth settled in his soul like a block of ice. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for justice, for the memory of a murdered world. The hegemony was not just an oppressive employer. It was a genocidal empire built on a foundation of lies. And Forlag, the celebrated admiral, was a monster. Lyra stirred. Her light strengthened, returning to its soft blue hue. She reached out a slender hand and touched the crude, stitched-up scar on his forearm, a memento from a shrapnel wound he had received on Cygnus X-1. As she touched him, the vision shifted. It was his memory now, sharp and agonizing. He saw his squad, pinned down by orbital fire. He saw a young, arrogant Commander Jorik giving a suicidal order to advance. He saw himself protesting, being overruled. He saw the faces of his men as the world disintegrated around them, their lives sacrificed for Jorik's ambition. He was the only survivor, a fact that had haunted his every waking moment since. Lyra did not flinch from the memory. She absorbed his pain, his guilt, his rage. And in return, she offered a feeling of quiet, profound understanding. A sense of shared scars. He had lost his squad, his purpose. She had lost her entire species, her world. They were both survivors of atrocities committed by the same enemy. In that cave, surrounded by the dead rock of a barren moon, two ghosts found a reason to keep fighting. They rested for another cycle, and Lyra's strength slowly returned. When she was able to walk on her own, they set out again, moving only at twilight and night to avoid detection. They traveled east, toward a range of jagged peaks that Lyra showed him in his mind. It was a place of significance to her, a place of power. Their journey was interrupted by the sudden, terrifying scream of a patrol skimmer cresting a nearby dune. Jorik's hunt was relentless. He had fanned his forces out across the quadrant, a net tightening around them. They scrambled for cover in a narrow ravine, but it was too late. The skimmer had spotted them. It swooped in, its pulse cannons spitting coherent light that vaporized the rock around them. Kale returned fire, his mag rifle slugs barely scratching the skimmer's armored hull. It was another impossible fight, but this time they were ready. Lyra did not unleash a massive wave of force. Instead, she did something more subtle, more precise. She extended her hands, and the dust and sand at their feet began to swirl, rising up to form a dense, impenetrable cloud. It was a localized dust storm, a perfect smokescreen that blinded the skimmer's sensors. The pilot, flying blind, pulled up sharply to avoid crashing into the ravine wall. But Jorik was on board. Kale saw him in the cockpit, his face illuminated by the console lights. He leaned out of the side hatch, a thermal imaging rifle in his hands. He could see their heat signatures through the dust. He fired. The round hit Kale in the shoulder, the impact spinning him around and slamming him into the ravine wall. His armor absorbed most of the energy, but a searing pain shot through him. His arm went numb. He dropped his rifle. Jorik's skimmer descended, landing on the ridge above them. Jorik himself leaped down into the ravine, his plasma pistol drawn. His face was a snarl of triumphant hatred. I told you there was nowhere to run, Kale, he spat. I'm going to enjoy this. He raised the pistol, aiming it at Kale's head. But before he could fire, Lyra moved between them. She stood before Jorik, her light flaring not with power, but with a profound sadness. She raised a hand and showed him a vision, not of her world, but of his. She showed him Cygnus X. 1, the battle, the men he had sacrificed. She showed him their faces, their last moments, the consequences of his ambition. Jorik staggered back, his pistol lowering. His eyes were wide with a horror that had nothing to do with the alien creature before him. He was seeing the ghosts he had tried to outrun his entire career. For a moment, a flicker of humanity, of remorse, crossed his face. It was only a moment. His fanaticism, his hatred for Kale, was stronger than his guilt. He shook his head, clearing the images away. Tricks, he snarled, raising the pistol again, this time aiming at Lyra. Filthy Xeno tricks. Kale, his vision blurring from the pain in his shoulder, lunged for his fallen rifle. He managed to grab it with his good hand, rolling onto his back and firing from the ground. The single shot was perfectly placed. It hit Jorik in the wrist, sending his plasma pistol flying. Jorik screamed in pain and rage. He clutched his shattered hand, his eyes burning with a murderous fire. He drew a combat knife with his other hand and charged at Kale. But he never reached him. Lyra acted. She did not kill him. She simply touched his forehead with two of her slender fingers. Jorik's body went rigid. His eyes went blank. He stood there for a second, a statue, and then collapsed into the dust, unconscious but alive. Lyra had simply turned him off. Kale struggled to his feet, clutching his wounded shoulder. They had won the engagement, but it was a hollow victory. He looked at Jorik's unconscious form. He could end it right now, put a round in his helmet, and be done with the man who had cost him everything. But as he looked at Lyra, at the sorrow in her silent gaze, he knew he could not. They were better than that. They had to be. He salvaged what he could from the skimmer, medkits, energy cells, water packs. As he tended to his wound, a priority message blinked on the skimmer's comms panel. It was a fleet-wide broadcast from Admiral Forlag. His face appeared on the small screen, grim and resolute. The asset has proven too volatile to recapture, Forlag announced. The quarantine has failed. By order of the Hegemony High Council, I am enacting Protocol Gamma. All forces are to withdraw to the designated safe distance. Orbital bombardment will commence in 10 cycles. May the authority of the Hegemony be absolute. The message ended. 10 cycles. They had less than a day before the entire moon was sterilized, turned into a ball of molten glass. Their personal war for survival had just escalated. It was now a race against planetary extinction. It had become an unwinnable war. There was no escape from a fleet of warships determined to erase them from existence. They reached the mountain range as the red giant began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. The peaks were strange, crystalline structures that hummed with a faint, residual energy. Lyra led him to a cave hidden behind a waterfall of fine, silvery sand. The air inside was cool and still. In the center of the cave was a single, massive crystal, pulsing with the same soft blue light as Lyra's own body. It was a focus point, a node of the planet's dormant life force. Here, in the heart of the mountain, Lyra revealed the final part of her plan, the terrible, impossible solution. She did not use images of the past, but of the future, a potential future. She showed him the Hegemony fleet in orbit, the bomb bay doors of the dreadnoughts opening like hungry mouths. She showed him the fire that would consume the moon, wiping away every trace of their existence. Then, she showed him another path. She showed him the central spire of the terraforming processor. It was more than just a power station. Its conduits reached deep into the moon's core, a network of artificial veins and arteries. Lyra, through the focusing crystal in the cave, could connect with that network. She could pour her life force not into the machinery, but through it, into the planet itself. She could reawaken the moon, reignite its dormant consciousness, and turn it into a living fortress. But there was a barrier. Her organic energy could not interface directly with the Hegemony's synthetic technology. She needed a bridge, a conduit who could understand both. A human. The process would require that human to physically merge with the processor's core nexus, their body and mind becoming the living interface between Lyra's power and the planet's heart. They would cease to be an individual, their consciousness dissolving, becoming one with the reawakened world. It was not death, but it was not life. It was a transformation into something else entirely, a permanent, silent guardianship. The vision ended. The impossible choice hung in the silent air of the cave between them. She was not asking him. She was simply presenting the truth. A direct fight was hopeless. Fleeing was impossible. The only way to save the world, to stop Forlag, was through an ultimate, absolute sacrifice. His sacrifice. Kale sat on the cold stone floor of the cave, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He thought of his life, the years wasted running from his past, the hollow existence he had carved out for himself on this forgotten rock. He had come here seeking oblivion, a quiet end to a life that had lost its meaning. He had wanted to fade away, to be forgotten. The choice before him was a different kind of oblivion. It was not a fading away, but a becoming. He could die as Kale, a disillusioned ex-soldier, a footnote in a forgotten conflict. Or he could cease to be Kale and, in doing so, give life back to a world and deliver a final, definitive blow against the tyranny that had taken everything from him. He looked at Lyra. She stood by the crystal, her light soft and steady. There was no expectation in her posture, only a deep, abiding patience. She had lost her entire world, her entire species, and yet she was willing to expend the last of her life force to save this barren rock. How could he do any less? His cynicism, the hard shell he had built around himself for a decade, finally cracked and fell away. He was not just fighting for Lyra, or for the memory of his fallen comrades. He was fighting for an idea, that one life, given willingly, could matter, that some things were worth dying for, that some things were worth becoming. He stood up. The pain in his shoulder was a dull, distant ache. His mind was clear, his purpose absolute. He walked over to the large crystal. It felt warm to the touch, alive. He placed his hand on its smooth surface. He did not need to speak. She already knew. He felt her mind touch his, a wave of profound sorrow, of gratitude, of respect. She laid her hand over his on the crystal. It was a silent pact, a solemn acceptance of the path they had to walk. There were no more words to be said, no more visions to be shared. There was only the task ahead. They had to return to the source, to the heart of the machine, and Kale had to face his final transformation. Their journey back to the processor spire was a grim, silent march. The sky was darkening, the first of the moon's two smaller, faster satellites tracing a silver arc across the star-dusted heavens. The countdown had begun. Forlag's fleet was moving into position. They could feel the subtle tremors in the ground as the capital ships adjusted their orbits, the low-frequency hum of their massive engines reaching across the vacuum of space. They moved through the canyons and ravines, a ghost and a man with a death sentence, navigating the landscape with a shared, unspoken purpose. Kale felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The internal conflict that had defined his life for so long was over. He was no longer a man running from his past, but a man walking toward his future, however strange and final it might be. The spire loomed before them, a dark spear against the twilight sky. Its emergency lights still painted it in strokes of red, a beacon of the chaos they had unleashed. Getting inside would not be easy. Forlag would have left a skeleton crew, and the facility's automated defenses would be active. Lyra pointed to a spot high up on the spire's base, a large exhaust port for the lower-level coolant systems. It was a blind spot in the defense grid, an unguarded entrance. The climb was perilous, the metal surface offering few handholds. Kale went first, his wounded shoulder protesting with every movement. Lyra followed, her lighter form moving with an unnatural grace, her feet seeming to find purchase where there was none. They slipped inside, emerging into a darkened, cavernous maintenance bay filled with the hulking shapes of dormant machinery. The air was still and cold. The spire felt like a tomb. They made their way upward, through silent corridors and deserted control rooms, moving toward the central core chamber. As they approached the upper levels, they found their path blocked. A squad of hegemony combat synthetics, humanoid robots with glowing red optics, stood guard before the final blast door leading to the core. They were motionless, silent sentinels, but their internal sensors would detect any movement. I can disable them, Lyra sent, her thought a clear, cool whisper in his mind. But the energy surge will alert command. No, Cale thought back, his hand tightening on his rifle. They're my problem. He had one chance to do this cleanly. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He was no longer just a farmer, no longer just a broken soldier. He was an instrument of a cause greater than himself. He burst from cover, his rifle barking in the confined space. The synthetics reacted with inhuman speed, their torsos swiveling, weapons raising. Cale's shots were perfect. He targeted the primary optic sensors, the one vulnerable spot in their armored heads. 1, 2, 3 synthetics fell, their red eyes going dark before they could even fire a shot. The fourth and fifth returned fire, their pulse rounds stitching a pattern of superheated holes in the wall behind him. He dove behind a support pillar, the impacts jarring the metal frame. He was pinned down, but Lyra created a diversion. She sent a pulse of energy down the corridor in the opposite direction, causing a bank of computer terminals to explode in a shower of sparks. The remaining 2 synthetics turned toward the sound, their programming prioritizing the new, unexpected threat. It was the opening Cale needed. He stepped out from behind the pillar and put 2 rounds through the back of their heads. The last robot fell, and silence returned to the corridor. They reached the final blast door. It was sealed, the controls fried from his earlier escape. But this time, they did not need to break it down. Lyra placed her hands on the thick metal. A soft blue light flowed from her palms, spreading across the surface of the door. The complex locking mechanisms within the door began to glow, their internal workings visible through the metal. With a series of sharp, resonant clicks, the locks disengaged. The massive door slid open. The core chamber was just as he had left it, a scene of destruction and chaos. The broken emitters lay on the floor, the shattered control panels sparking feebly. In the center of the room was the nexus, the point where the siphoning cables had once attached to Lyra. It was a raised dais, a crystalline interface that pulsed with a malevolent red light, the system's standby mode. That was his destination. But they were not alone. A single figure stood by the nexus, his back to them. He was clad in the black and gold armor of a hegemony command officer. He turned slowly, and Cale felt a chill run down his spine. It was Jorik. His wrist was crudely bandaged, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes burned with an unholy, obsessive light. He must have woken up and followed them. "I knew you'd come back here," Jorik said, his voice a low rasp. "Back to the scene of your crime. The Admiral was wrong to abandon this facility. He was wrong to underestimate you. But I never did." Jorik held a detonator in his good hand. "I've planted charges on the primary conduits. If I can't have this facility, no one can. I'll blow the whole spire, the whole moon, to hell before I let you and that thing win." Cale raised his rifle. "It's over, Jorik. Stand down." Jorik laughed, a dry, broken sound. "Over? It was over for you the day you survived Cygnus, Cale. You should have died with the rest of them. You were always a coward, always hiding behind protocol, behind excuses. Now you hide behind an alien monster." This was the final confrontation. Not with the hegemony, not with Forlag, but with the ghost that had haunted him for a decade. He had to get to the Nexus. Jorik was the final obstacle. Cale fired. Jorik was faster, diving behind the Nexus platform. The fight began, a desperate, close-quarters battle in the heart of the machine. Pulse rounds and mag slugs ricocheted around the chamber. Cale advanced, using the broken machinery for cover, his movements fluid and efficient. All the years of training, all the battles he had survived, it all came down to this single, brutal firefight. He managed to flank Jorik, catching him off guard. He fired a burst that tore through Jorik's leg armor, sending him sprawling to the floor. Cale closed the distance, kicking the detonator from Jorik's hand. He stood over his old commander, his rifle aimed at Jorik's head. Jorik looked up at him, not with fear, but with a final, defiant sneer. "Do it," he hissed. "Prove you're a killer, just like me." Cale hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, Jorik lunged, not at Cale, but at the detonator that had skittered across the floor. He was fast, fueled by a fanatic's desperation. His fingers were inches from the device. He would never reach it. A tendril of blue light lashed out from Lyra, wrapping around Jorik's ankle. It lifted him into the air, holding him suspended upside down. Jorik struggled, but he was helpless. Lyra did not harm him. She simply held him, neutralizing the threat. Kale did not waste the opportunity. He ran to the Nexus. He climbed onto the dais, the red light bathing him, the crystal interface humming beneath his boots. This was it, the moment of his unmaking. He turned and looked at Lyra one last time. She was holding Jorik at bay, her featureless face turned toward him. He felt a final, powerful wave of emotion from her, sorrow, love, and a fierce, burning pride. He closed his eyes. He knelt, placing his hands on the crystal surface of the Nexus. Now, he sent with all the force of his will. Do it now. The process began. Lyra released Jorik, who fell in a heap to the floor. She focused all of her being, all of her power, on Kale. A blinding beam of pure blue energy shot from her chest, striking him, enveloping him. It was not painful. It was everything. His entire life flashed before his eyes. His childhood on a green colony world, his first day of enlistment, the faces of his squad, the long, lonely years of his self-imposed exile, the moment he first saw Lyra in her cage. He felt his body begin to dissolve. His cells, his atoms, were being unwound, rewritten. He was becoming light. He was becoming energy. He felt his consciousness expanding, spreading out from the Nexus, flowing through the conduits of the spire, down into the very core of the moon. He was the rock. He was the dust. He was the dormant seed of life waiting beneath the surface. He was Kale, and he was everything. The last vestiges of his individual self felt Lyra's final gift, her life force pouring into him, into the planet, giving him the strength to complete the transformation. He felt her fade, her energy expended, but her essence was now intertwined with his, with the world. They were one. A massive, silent pulse of emerald green energy erupted from the spire. It was not an explosion, but a wave of pure life. It washed over the moon's surface, and where it passed, the ochre dust stirred, the dead rock sighed, and for the first time in millennia, something began to grow. The wave expanded, reaching into space. On the bridge of the Hegemony flagship, Admiral Forlag watched in stunned disbelief as his tactical displays went dead. The green wave washed over his fleet, and every ship went dark. Weapons systems failed. Engines died. Communication arrays went silent. His entire armada, the pride of the Hegemony, was rendered inert, floating helplessly in space, neutered by a power it could not comprehend. Jorik, who had scrambled to his feet just in time to witness the transformation, was caught at the edge of the energy release. He did not scream. He simply dissolved. His body and his hatred turned into motes of dust that settled on the newly awakened ground. Forlag stood on his silent bridge, staring at the moon on the main view screen. It was no longer a dead, red rock. It was glowing with a soft, green light. It was alive. He had not been defeated by an army or a weapon. He had been defeated by a farmer, a man who had chosen to plant a seed in the most hostile soil imaginable, and it had bloomed. 10 years passed. The incident at LV-417, now known throughout the galaxy as Kale's Rest, was the catalyst that brought the corporate hegemony to its knees. Their greatest fleet, neutralized without a single shot fired, became a symbol of their hubris. The secrets of their expansion, of the genocide of the Whisperers, were exposed. The monolithic empire fractured, collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. A new era of cooperation began, born from the revelation that humanity was not alone, and that power was not the only currency in the universe. Kale's Rest was now a vibrant, thriving world. The barren rock had been transformed into a paradise of crystalline forests and glowing flora. The air was sweet and clean. It was a protected world, a sanctuary, a testament to the sacrifice that had made it possible. Lyra walked through a forest of silver-barked trees, their leaves humming with a soft, musical light. She was not alone. From the seeds of her life force and the awakened consciousness of the planet, others had been born. A new generation of Whisperers, young and curious, followed her through the woods, their forms flickering in and out of existence like shy fawns. She was their teacher, their elder, the keeper of the memory. The terraforming spire still stood at the center of the valley, but it was no longer a monument to industrial conquest. It was covered in a sheath of living, crystalline growth, its harsh metal lines softened by nature's reclamation. It pulsed with a steady, gentle green light, the silent, watchful heartbeat of the world. It was a guardian. It was Kale. An elderly woman stood on a viewing platform overlooking the valley. Her face was lined with age and wisdom, but her eyes were clear. It was Alara, the weary technician who had once worked at the facility, now a respected diplomat in the new galactic Concord. She came here every year, on the anniversary of the awakening. She looked at the spire, at the silent hero encased within. She remembered the man, the quiet, disillusioned contractor who was just counting down the days. The hegemony had labeled him a traitor, a terrorist. The new histories called him a savior, a martyr. But Alarin knew the truth. He was just a man who, when faced with an impossible choice, had remembered how to be human. He was a farmer, and he had planted a garden of peace that had spread to the stars. The spire pulsed, a soft, steady rhythm, a silent promise that his sacrifice would never be forgotten.